Welcome back, everyone. Before we dive in, make sure you drop your thoughts and the lessons you took from this story in the comments. And don't forget to like and subscribe. Let's get into it. Naomi Harris woke up to the sound of someone coughing on the other side of a thin curtain. The smell of disinfectant was sharp and cold, and it burned her throat when she inhaled. Her left side felt as if someone had pressed a hot iron into it. Every breath sent a deep ache through her ribs and abdomen. For a few seconds, she did not remember where she was. All she saw was the yellowed ceiling and a flickering fluorescent light. Then it came back in a rush. The hospital, the surgery, the kidney. She turned her head slowly, fighting a wave of dizziness. This was not the private recovery suite Damon had promised. The walls were stained and peeling. A cracked clock ticked loudly above the door, a second hand jumping instead of gliding. A plastic cup sat on a dented metal tray beside her bed, the water inside it already lukewarm. Naomi tried to press the call button, but her arm trembled. Her fingers shook and slipped off the rubber surface. The door opened before she could try again. Damon Harris walked in. He was not wearing the worried expression she had pictured in the nights before surgery. He wore a clean navy suit, the kind he saved for meetings with investors, and his hair was neatly lined up as if he had just left a barbershop. Behind him sat his mother, Evelyn Harris, in a wheelchair, wrapped in a soft shawl. Her expression was sharp, not tired. Beside Damon stood a woman in a fitted red dress and flawless makeup. Naomi recognized her from pictures on social media and from a brief introduction at a charity gala months before. Sierra Vaughn, Damon's former colleague. Damon's maybe more than that. Naomi's dry throat scraped when she tried to speak. She whispered, barely audible. Naomi said, "Damon, did it work? Did your mother get the kidney?" Damon walked closer and dropped a thick white envelope onto Naomi's chest. The paper landed directly over the fresh bandage on her left side. Pain exploded through her torso, so sudden she gasped. Damon said calmly, "That is your divorce agreement. I already signed it." Naomi stared at him. For a moment the words did not make sense. They sounded like fragments from a conversation in another room. Divorce. Paper. Signed. Her ears rang, and the room seemed to dip and tilt. Naomi said, "I just gave you my kidney. I just tried to save your mother." Evelyn let out a dry, humorless laugh that sounded more like a cough. Evelyn said, "You saved nothing, dear. You were only useful for what was inside your body. Now that it is gone, so is your place in this family." Sierra smiled and lifted her left hand. A large diamond ring caught the weak light and scattered it back in sharp flashes. Sierra said, "Damon and I are engaged. I am carrying his child." Naomi felt the room spin again and steadied her head against the thin pillow. Damon finally met her eyes. His were cool, calculating, already distant. Damon said, "We were never really a family, Naomi. You were a solution to a problem. My mother needed a kidney. You were a match. That is all." Naomi opened her mouth, but her voice disappeared somewhere between her chest and her lips. Her heart pounded and then seemed to slow, each beat heavy and far apart. Damon added, "We will give you $10,000. Enough to start over somewhere cheap. You can sign the papers when you are discharged." Naomi felt something inside her crack. It did not shatter with a dramatic sound. It broke quietly, the way a glass fractures under steady pressure, invisible until it finally splits. She realized in that moment that the man she loved, the man who had promised her a home and a family, had never really existed. The version of Damon she had loved was a story she had told herself. To him, she had not been a wife. She had been spare parts. Evelyn shifted in her wheelchair and examined Naomi as if she were a defective product that had already served its purpose. Sierra adjusted her dress, bored already. Before Naomi could gather enough air to scream, the door opened again. A tall man in a white coat stepped inside, his badge swinging slightly from a clipped lanyard. His eyes moved quickly from Naomi's pale, shaking body to the heart monitor beside her bed. The green line on the screen jumped unevenly. His jaw tightened. The doctor said, "What is happening in here?" Damon turned toward him with practiced politeness. Damon said, "Doctor, this is a private family matter. We are almost finished." The doctor did not move aside. He stepped closer, placing himself between Naomi's bed and the group. He said, "My name is Dr. Leonard Price, head of transplant surgery at this hospital, and you are causing medical distress to my patient." Evelyn lifted her chin, the movement slow but proud. Evelyn said, This woman is no longer part of our family. We are leaving. She can handle her own affairs. Dr. Price's eyes did not leave Damon's face. Dr. Price said, "No, you are not leaving. Not until we clear something up." Damon frowned, irritation finally breaking through his cool expression. Damon said, "Clear up what?" "The surgery is done. My mother received the kidney. We are grateful, but there is nothing left to discuss." Dr. Price turned his attention to Evelyn. His voice remained professional, but there was steel beneath the surface. Dr. Price said, "The kidney removal from Naomi Harris was completed successfully, but the transplant into you was canceled." The air in the room seemed to freeze. Even the coughing from the bed behind the curtains stopped for a moment, as if the patient there were listening. Evelyn snapped, "What do you mean, canceled?" Her fingers tightened on the armrests of the wheelchair. Dr. Price said, "Your final blood test showed active viral infection and strong immune rejection markers. If we had placed Naomi's kidney into your body, you would have died on the operating table. The risk was not acceptable. Under emergency reallocation protocol, the kidney was redirected to the next priority patient on the national list with a matching profile." Damon's face drained of color. Damon said, "The next priority patient? Who was that?" Dr. Price did not hesitate. Dr. Price said, "Reginald King. He was transported from a private clinic earlier that night. The transplant was successful. Naomi saved his life." The name landed in the room like thunder. Reginald King was one of the richest and most powerful business leaders in the country, the man whose decisions could move stock markets and reshape entire industries. Damon took a step back. His plans, whatever they had been, did not match this new reality. Damon said, "You gave away our kidney." Dr. Price's eyes sharpened. Dr. Price said, "No. I followed the law and the ethical standards of my profession. You signed documents that allowed for emergency reallocation in the event of medical complications. You tried to control something that could not be controlled. You tried to trap her. You trapped yourselves." Naomi watched Damon's jaw clench. The hand that had dropped the divorce papers on her chest curled into a fist at his side. For the first time since he entered, he looked uncertain. Evelyn stared at Leonard as if he had personally betrayed her. Sierra frowned, annoyed that the script she expected had changed. Within the hour, Naomi was no longer in the broken ward. Nurses appeared almost as if summoned by an invisible signal. They adjusted her foreline, checked her incision, and moved her gently but efficiently. Her bed rolled down the corridor, away from the stained walls and flickering lights. Damon tried to follow, but hospital security stepped in front of him. One of the guards said, "You will need to wait in the family area, sir." Damon protested, but the guard did not move. Naomi's bed turned into a quiet hallway and toward a private elevator. The doors closed on Damon's angry voice and Evelyn's thin, outraged demands. When the elevator opened again, Naomi was on the top floor. Soft light filtered through large windows. Fresh flowers lined the walls in simple vases. The air smelled clean, not of harsh chemicals, but of something vaguely floral and calming. This was a different world inside the same building. Naomi's new room was larger than her entire apartment. There was a wide hospital bed, a small couch near the window, a bookshelf with a few neatly arranged hardcovers, and a view of the city skyline stretching toward the horizon. The nurse who settled her and spoke gently and explained each movement before touching her. Naomi lay back against the elevated headrest, overwhelmed. She whispered, "Why am I here?" A man in a black suit stepped into the room as if in answer. He was in his 40s, with a precise fade and a quiet, observant gaze. He carried a leather folder. The man said, "Ms. Harris, my name is Omar Lewis. I represent Mr. King." Naomi stared at him. Her voice was scratchy. Naomi said, "Reginald King? I do not understand." Omar moved closer, but not too close. He placed the folder on the small table by the bed. Omar said, "You saved his life. He insists that you will be protected and cared for while you recover. This floor is reserved for his use when he or his family require treatment. For the time being, it is yours." Omar took a phone from the inside pocket of his suit and set it beside the folder. Omar said, "Your old phone was damaged and later destroyed by Damon Harris. We retrieved what we could from the carrier logs. This new phone is secure. Our legal team and security staff are already connected. You will see contact numbers labeled as King Legal and King Security. If anyone from the Harris family attempts to contact you directly or indirectly, you do not need to respond. You can refer everything to those teams." Naomi stared at the sleek black device, out of place beside the plastic hospital cup and the 4-pump. Naomi said, "I do not understand why he is doing all of this. He does not know me." Omar's expression softened slightly without losing its professional edge. Omar said, "Mr. King understands debt. He believes that the life you gave him cannot be repaid, but it must be honored. For now, you only need to rest and remain safe. The rest will be explained as you heal." He stepped back and nodded to Dr. Price, who had entered quietly while Omar spoke. Dr. Price checked Naomi's chart and adjusted the settings on the monitor. When the nurse left, he pulled a chair closer and sat down. His shoulders relaxed a little for the first time since she had met him. Dr. Price said, "You are stable now. Your body will need time to adjust. The pain will ease. You will live a long, normal life with one kidney, as long as you take care of yourself." Naomi looked at him, the question that had been pressing against her ribcage finally pushing its way out. Naomi said, "Why did you help me? You could have ignored what they were doing." Dr. Price sighed. Lines at the corners of his eyes deepened. Dr. Price said, "I have seen too many people sign away parts of themselves because they think they do not matter. You were not in a position to fight for yourself in that ward. So I did what any doctor who respects his oath should do." Naomi let her eyes close for a moment. For the first time since the surgery, she felt a faint sense of safety. It felt fragile, but it was real. Before Naomi became a patient in a private hospital suite with a view of the city, she had been a young woman who believed in family more than anything else. That belief did not come from a life filled with family dinners and shared holidays. It came from absence. Naomi had grown up drifting from one foster home to another in Ohio and Michigan. Some houses were warm and busy, filled with other children and noisy meals. Some were cold, the kind of places where kindness felt like a loan that could be taken back at any time. She learned early that love could disappear overnight. Social workers arrived without warning. Suitcases were always half-packed. Naomi knew that a raised voice in the kitchen might mean sleeping somewhere else by the end of the week. By the time she was 18, Naomi wanted only one thing. She wanted to belong somewhere. She wanted to sit at a table where no one questioned why she was there. She met Damon Harris 2 years before the surgery at a community fundraiser in Houston organized by a nonprofit that provided tutoring for foster youth. Naomi had gone as a volunteer, helping set up folding chairs and refill plastic cups of punch. Damon had arrived near the end of the event, wearing a charcoal blazer and a confident smile. He ran a mid-sized manufacturing company that donated computers to the program, and everyone seemed to know his name. Naomi noticed how easily he moved through the room, how people laughed at his jokes and leaned in when he spoke. He noticed her when she dropped a stack of flyers and bent to pick them up, her cheeks flushing with embarrassment. Damon stepped forward and helped gather the scattered papers. Damon said, "You look like you are doing the real work here." Naomi had laughed awkwardly and said, "I am just trying not to make a mess." He had asked her name, and he remembered it. Over the next few months, Damon made a habit of appearing wherever Naomi volunteered. At a school supply drive, he brought extra backpacks and stayed to help load boxes. At a holiday toy event, he spent an hour untangling strings of lights with her. He listened when she spoke, not just nodding but asking questions about her job at the small accounting firm where she worked and about the foster families she still kept in touch with. He remembered small details like the way she preferred tea to coffee and how she always kept her phone volume low because loud notifications made her jump. When he asked her to dinner, she hesitated for exactly half a second before saying yes. Damon spoke of stability, of building something solid. When he proposed a year later in a quiet restaurant overlooking the river, he held her hands and said, "You will never be alone again, Naomi. We will build our own family." She believed him with her whole heart. From the beginning, Evelyn Harris made it clear that Naomi was not welcome in the world Damon had grown up in. Evelyn came from old money, not the flashiness of new wealth, but the controlled arrogance of someone whose grandparents had owned businesses when everyone else they knew worked for them. She saw Naomi as someone who did not know how to dress, speak, or move like a Harris. At family dinners in their large brick house in an upscale Houston neighborhood, Evelyn would correct Naomi's posture or her table manners in front of everyone. Evelyn said things like, "Do not grip your fork like that, dear, you are not in a diner," and "Try not to laugh so loudly, it carries." Damon always told Naomi to ignore it. Damon said, "My mother is just difficult. She will come around. Give her time." So Naomi tried harder. She cooked elaborate meals when they hosted, even when she was tired from work. She cleaned the house until it gleamed. She smiled even when Evelyn criticized everything she did. Naomi believed that if she could prove she was good enough, Evelyn would finally see her as family. This is how many people become trapped. Not because they are weak, but because they want to be loved. When Evelyn's health started to fail and the doctors said she needed a kidney transplant, Naomi did not think of escape. She thought of opportunity. Damon came to her one night with red eyes and a voice that trembled at all the right moments. He said, "Mom does not have much time. Dialysis is not enough anymore. Her heart is getting weaker every day." Naomi felt fear sink like a stone into her stomach. Naomi said, "I know she is sick. I am scared too." Damon took her hands in his and squeezed them. Damon said, "You are a match. The tests proved it. Your blood and tissue are a perfect match. It is like a miracle." Naomi pulled her hands back slowly. Naomi said, "A kidney is not a small thing, Damon. What if something goes wrong? What if I cannot have children? What if my own health fails?" Damon sighed like a man carrying the weight of the world on his shoulders. Damon said, "Medical science is advanced now. You will live a normal life. Children can come later. Right now my mother is running out of time." Naomi looked at him, torn between fear and the desperate desire to belong. Damon saw the hesitation and pressed where he knew it would hurt most. Damon said, "You always said you wanted a real family. You wanted to belong. This is how you become a true Harris." Naomi felt those words land like a soft but dangerous blow. For someone who had grown up with nothing permanent, the idea of being fully accepted was stronger than any fear. Naomi said quietly, "If I do this, will your mother finally accept me?" Damon smiled and kissed her forehead. Damon said, "You will be her hero. She will love you. Everyone will see what kind of woman you are." Hope wrapped itself around her doubts and squeezed. She told herself that love required sacrifice. She did not yet understand that love without respect is not love at all. The paperwork came quickly, almost too quickly. A young nurse brought in a stack of forms in a plastic folder and set them on the bedside table in the preoperative room. A notary sat in a chair by the wall, flipping through a small notebook. Damon sat beside Naomi, close enough that she could feel the heat of his arm. He guided her hand from one signature line to the next. Damon said, "This one is just your consent for surgery. This one is standard risk disclosure. This one is acknowledgement of post-operative instructions." Naomi signed, her head already aching with worry. When she reached the last page, she frowned. Naomi said, "What is this one?" "Emergency reallocation waiver." Damon glanced at the text, then smiled in a practiced, reassuring way. Damon said, "It is only in case something unexpected happens in surgery, like a complication with the timing. It allows the doctors to make fast decisions to save lives. It is routine. If we do not sign, they cannot move quickly if they need to." Naomi's eyes tried to focus on the small print, but the words blurred. Her heart was full of fear and hope at the same time. She thought of Evelyn looking at her with grudging respect. She thought of being called daughter without hesitation. So she signed. Traps are not always built with chains. Sometimes they are built with forms, signatures, and promises spoken in soft voices. After Dr. Price confronted Damon and Evelyn, and after Omar moved her to the private floor, the days blurred together. Naomi slept in short stretches, waking to waves of pain and to gentle hands adjusting her medication. She had nightmares in which Damon stood at the foot of her bed counting money while surgeons cut into her side. She woke with her heart racing and her hand pressed protectively over the bandage. Each time, the nurse reminded her that she was safe. On the third day, when she could sit up without the room spinning, a man in a gray suit entered with a careful smile and a leather briefcase. He was in his 50s, with salt at his temples and a calm, deliberate way of moving. The man said, "Ms. Harris, my name is Martin Ellis. I am Mr. King's attorney. May I sit?" Naomi nodded. Martin opened the briefcase and took out a neat stack of documents. Naomi's stomach clenched at the sight of more paper. Naomi said, "If those are more forms, I am not sure I can sign anything else." Martin smiled faintly. Martin said, "You are not here to sign anything you do not understand. You are here so I can explain what Damon did in your name and what options you have now." Naomi's fingers tightened on the blanket. She said, "I do not have anything left to lose." Martin shook his head slowly. Martin said, "That is exactly where you are wrong. During your marriage, Damon used your name to register several properties and 2 manufacturing companies. He did this to protect his own assets from business risks and creditors. From what I have seen, he assumed that your lack of legal training would prevent you from realizing what he was doing. Naomi frowned. Naomi said, I remember signing some things when he said he was refinancing or restructuring. I thought I was just being supportive. Martin turned a document toward her and tapped the bold print at the top. Martin said, legally, these properties and companies belong to you. Your signature is on every line that matters. When Damon rushed the divorce, he made a critical mistake. The agreement he dropped on your chest includes a clause where he waives any claim to assets registered solely in your name. He believed those assets were his, so he did not think he was giving anything up. Naomi stared at the list. Industrial buildings, a warehouse on the outskirts of Houston, a small factory in Dallas, a condo near the medical center, a pair of rental homes. Numbers lined up beside each entry, more money than she had ever imagined owning. Naomi began to laugh, quietly at first, then with a deep, shaky sound that startled even her. Damon had spent years calling her naive, telling her she did not understand the complexities of business. Now his greed had made her wealthy. Martin waited until her laughter faded. Martin said, if you sign the divorce papers now with counsel and file them correctly, the agreement becomes permanent. He cannot undo it. Given Mr. King's resources, we can ensure that every legal path he tries to use is blocked. It is your choice, Naomi. You can stay tied to him and fight over everything, or you can end it in a way that leaves you free and protected. Naomi picked up the pen that lay beside the folder. When she had signed the donation papers, her hand had shaken. Fear had guided her then. Now her hand was steady. Naomi said, I want it finished. I want him out of my life. I want to close his last door. Martin nodded once, a small, respectful gesture. Martin said, then we will make sure it is finished. As she signed, Naomi felt the last thread connecting her to Damon's snap. Outside her window, the city kept moving, cars flowing along the highway, lights changing at intersections, people living their lives without knowing that somewhere above them, a woman was quietly reclaiming her own. When Naomi left the hospital weeks later, she did not return to the small apartment Damon had chosen because it was good enough for now. She moved into one of Reginald King's residences near the medical center, a mid-rise building with secure access and a view of a park. It was not a gift, at least not in the way Damon would have understood gifts. It was part of a plan. Tutors arrived in the mornings. A professor of contract law sat with her at the wide dining table and walked her through the basics of agreements, clauses, and hidden traps. A financial advisor reviewed balance sheets and cash flow statements with her until the numbers stopped looking like symbols and began to tell stories. A vocal coach helped her project her voice without apology. Naomi cut her hair shorter. She started standing a little straighter, noticing how people responded when she walked into a room with her shoulders back instead of slightly hunched. The woman who had once apologized for taking up space in a room began to disappear. In her place, another woman slowly emerged, one who understood she had the right to say no. Reginald King came to visit her once she was strong enough to sit on the balcony with a blanket over her legs. He was thinner than his photographs in the business magazines, the weight loss from his illness still visible. His face was lined, but his eyes were sharp and clear. He lowered himself carefully into the chair beside hers. Reginald said, "You gave me more than a kidney, Ms. Harris. You gave me time, and time is the most valuable thing in the world." Naomi did not know what to say to a man whose decisions could hire or fire thousands with a single signature. She said, "I signed the forms because I thought I was saving my family. I did not even know your name." Reginald nodded slowly. Reginald said, "You were used, but you are not broken. If you want to survive people like your ex-husband, you cannot rely on kindness alone. You need power. Money is one kind. Knowledge is another. Confidence is a third. I can offer you access to all three. What you do with them will be your choice." Naomi looked out at the park below, at children running between trees, at parents calling them back toward benches. Naomi said, "I do not want to become like Damon." Reginald shook his head. Reginald said, "You do not have to. There is a difference between power and cruelty. Cruelty takes for pleasure. Power protects what matters. Learn what you need to learn. Decide who you want to be. The rest will follow." In the months that followed, Naomi did exactly that. She completed an intensive course in business management funded by King Enterprises. She interned quietly at first at King Capital, the investment arm of his empire, sitting in on meetings, taking notes, listening more than she spoke. She watched how the senior directors negotiated, how they asked questions that cut straight to the weak points in a proposal. She saw deals accepted, rejected, reshaped. She learned when to remain silent and when to press. By the time a year had passed from the day she had first signed a consent form at the hospital, Naomi was no longer a trainee. She wore her own badge that read Senior Director, Strategic Investments. While Naomi rebuilt herself, Damon Harris was unraveling. His manufacturing company had grown quickly on credit and loans that assumed constant expansion. When a major client moved production overseas, Damon's cash flow choked. He tried to cover the gaps with short-term loans and creative accounting. The properties he had once thought of as his safety net no longer belonged to him. He still did not fully understand how badly he had miscalculated. Evelyn was back on dialysis, her body weaker now than before. She blamed everyone but herself. Sierra spent money faster than he could track it, convinced that the engagement ring on her finger was a guarantee that the lifestyle would never end. Their arguments grew more frequent and more vicious. Creditors started to call not just his office, but his personal phone. Lawyers left messages. Damon's charm, the same charm that had once made volunteers laugh at fundraisers, began to sound desperate. One afternoon, as Damon sat in his office staring at a spreadsheet that refused to balance, his assistant knocked and stepped in with a heavy envelope. The assistant said, "This was delivered by courier. It is from King Capital." Damon straightened in his chair. His heart leaped. King Capital was one of the few firms with enough resources to rescue his company. He tore the envelope open. Inside was a formal invitation printed on thick paper. It invited him to a private investment meeting to discuss a potential partnership and restructuring plan. At the bottom was a signature that made his mouth twist into a humorless smile. Senior Director Naomi Harris. Damon said aloud, "She still needs me." He told himself that she wanted closure, that she could not resist reaching back for what she had lost. He told himself many things as he adjusted his tie in the restroom mirror and practiced his most winning expression. The King Capital conference room where the meeting took place was all glass and polished wood. A long table stretched between floor-to-ceiling windows, with the city spread out below like a map. Naomi stood at the far end of the table, reviewing a file. She wore a dark green dress and a simple necklace. Her hair framed her face in a clean, intentional style. She looked up as Damon entered. For a heartbeat, he saw the woman he had once convinced himself he could control. Then he realized how wrong he had been. Her posture was relaxed but assured. Her eyes did not dart away from his. Damon said, "Naomi, you look different." Naomi said, "I look like myself." Her voice was even. She gestured toward a chair. Naomi said, "Have a seat, Mr. Harris. We have 30 minutes." Damon launched into his pitch, describing supply chains, international contracts, and the potential of his company if only someone would help him over the current rough patch. He gestured, smiled, leaned forward at the right moments. Naomi listened without interruption, her fingers resting lightly on a pen, her expression unreadable. When he finished, she opened a folder and slid a document across the table. Naomi said, "King Capital is prepared to offer you $15 million in exchange for a majority stake and certain performance conditions. The terms are outlined here." Damon saw the number and felt hope bloom. He started to read the first page, then flipped ahead to the signature line. Naomi watched him. Naomi said, "I recommend that you read all of it. The collateral requirements are strict." Damon waved a hand. Damon said, "I trust this is fair. You work here now. You would not sabotage me." Naomi tilted her head slightly. Naomi said, "You are free to trust whatever you like. The paperwork is clear." Damon signed where she pointed, initialing pages without slowing, the way he had once guided her hand through stacks of forms. He listed as collateral several properties he still believed were his, including the warehouse and the rental homes. He had not fully internalized that those properties were already legally hers. The trap closed with a soft click of a pen. Naomi did not smile. She simply gathered the documents and said, "Thank you, Mr. Harris. King Capital will transfer the funds once the filing is complete and the liens are in place." Damon stood and straightened his jacket. Damon said, "I knew you still cared." Naomi looked at him for a moment, as if examining something from a great distance. Naomi said, "You are right about one thing. I care about what you did." Caring and needing you are not the same. He left convinced he had won. He had no idea that every step he took now led to a precipice he had built with his own hands. Over the following months, Damon failed to meet the aggressive sales targets he had agreed to in the contract. The economy shifted. A supplier backed out. A small scandal about unsafe working conditions in one of his factories hit local news. Revenue dipped when it needed to rise. The grace periods in the contract expired. King Capital's legal team, with Martin's guidance, moved in. They did not need to be cruel. They only needed to follow the clauses Damon had signed. Liens were enforced. Accounts were frozen. Properties were seized. Damon's office furniture was moved out by professionals who did not meet his eyes. While this unfolded, Evelyn's health deteriorated again. Her dialysis sessions became more frequent, leaving her exhausted and angry. Sierra grew more distant, spending nights out with friends he did not know and returning with explanations that did not quite add up. The life Damon had built by using other people as tools began to collapse around him. Naomi chose the hospital as the place for the final confrontation. She did not fully trust boardrooms or offices to hold the weight of what needed to happen. In the hospital, truth was sharper. Machines did not lie. Evelyn lay in a dialysis bed, her skin sallow and her eyes ringed with shadows. Tubes connected her to humming equipment. Damon sat beside her, his shoulders slumped. Sierra stood near the window, scrolling through her phone, her ring catching flashes of light from the parking lot outside. When Naomi walked into the room, the air shifted. Damon looked up and stood quickly. Damon said, "Naomi, you came." Naomi did not look at him. She walked to the small table and placed a folder there. She turned to Sierra. Naomi said, "You should read this." Sierra frowned but took the folder and flipped it open. Inside were printed bank records, hotel receipts, and photographs. Transactions from Damon's company accounts traced neatly into Sierra's personal accounts. Photos showed Sierra entering a downtown hotel late at night with another man, his face clear in every image. Sierra's fingers tightened on the pages. Naomi said, "You have been stealing from Damon's company accounts and transferring money to yourself. You have also been in a relationship with his head of sales for months. The dates match your trips when you told Damon you were visiting your aunt in Dallas." Sierra laughed weakly. Sierra said, "This is twisted. You are trying to frame me." Naomi placed another sheet of paper on the bed. Naomi said, "This is the timeline of your pregnancy based on your medical records. Damon was in Chicago for a trade expo when you conceived. The dates do not match his travel schedule." Damon picked up the document with shaking hands. His voice broke. Damon said, "Is the baby mine, Sierra?" Sierra did not answer. Her silence was louder than any confession. Damon turned slowly toward her, his face blank. Before he could speak again, Naomi took out her phone and tapped the screen. A recording played through the small speaker. Damon's own voice filled the room, captured from a conversation he had once had in what he thought was a private corner of a restaurant. Damon said on the recording, "Sierra is a temporary distraction. Once I get the money, I am out. My mother is a burden. If I have to put her in a nursing home to free up funds, I will. I am not going to let anyone drag me down." The room went utterly still. The hum of the machines sounded suddenly loud. Evelyn stared at him, her eyes wide, her hand trembling where it rested on the sheet. Evelyn said, "You are going to abandon me." Damon dropped to his knees beside the bed, clutching the rail. Damon said, "Mom, I was lying. I was just angry. I would never actually do that." His words sounded thin, stripped of the polish they once had. Naomi looked at all of them, her expression calm but not cold. Naomi said, "You sold me for a kidney. You sold Sierra for money. You were prepared to sell your own mother for comfort. There is nothing left for you to trade." She turned to Evelyn. Naomi said, "I gave you my kidney because I believed you were my family. You made me bleed, and then you threw me away. I will not bleed for you again." Evelyn reached out a shaking hand toward Naomi, fingers clawing at the air. Evelyn said, "Help me. Please. I am still your mother-in-law." Naomi stepped back out of reach. Naomi said, "Some gifts can only be given once." The heart monitor beside Evelyn's bed began to beep rapidly, the steady rhythm breaking into frantic peaks. Nurses shouted in the hallway. Naomi turned and walked toward the door without looking back. The room filled with panic behind her. A code was called over the intercom. Naomi heard sneakers squeaking against the floor and the crash of a cart being pushed at high speed. But to her the noise felt distant, like weather on the other side of thick glass. She kept walking, her footsteps measured. She stepped into the waiting area and sat down, her hands folded in her lap. Somewhere behind the closed door, people tried to pull Evelyn back from the edge. Naomi did not pray for success, and she did not pray for failure. She sat in the quiet and finally allowed herself to breathe without thinking of anyone else's demands. Evelyn Harris died that night. The doctors recorded kidney failure complicated by heart strain and shock. Nurses later said that the look on her face when she heard the recording of Damon's words had seemed to take more out of her than the dialysis ever had. 2 hours after Evelyn's death, police officers arrived at the hospital. King Capital's legal team had already filed the relevant reports. Damon was arrested in the hallway for fraud, asset misuse, and breach of contract. His company accounts had been frozen, his ownership diluted to almost nothing. Sierra was taken in for questioning about embezzlement and identity fraud. Hospital security escorted her out a different door when she tried to slip away during the commotion. Damon did not fight. The fight seemed to have drained out of him along with the illusions he had built. He walked down the corridor in handcuffs, his head bowed, past the very ward where Naomi had once lain believing she had saved his family. Naomi watched from a distance near the elevator, her back against the cool metal rail of a gurney that stood unused in the hallway. She did not feel joy. There was no satisfaction in watching someone she had once loved fall apart. What she felt instead was relief, a slow loosening of something that had been clenched inside her for far too long. She understood then that justice did not require her to be cruel. It only required the truth to be seen and acted upon. When the officers turned the corner with Damon between them, he glanced up and saw her. For a second, his expression changed, as if he might beg. Naomi held his gaze calmly. She did not nod. She did not look away. She simply stood there, steady, until he disappeared from view. 1 year later, Naomi Harris stood in a quiet cemetery in Ohio. 2 simple headstones marked the graves of her parents, people she barely remembered but still visited whenever she could. The sky was clear and pale, with a thin winter sun hanging low. She placed fresh white flowers at the base of each stone and brushed a smudge of dirt from one of the engraved dates. Naomi said softly, "I am all right." It was not a speech. It was a simple report. So much had changed in 12 months that it felt like she was speaking on behalf of someone else. Yet the scar on her side was still hers. It had faded into a thin white line, no longer angry or swollen. Sometimes it ached in the cold, but it no longer made her feel weak. It reminded her that she had survived. After Damon's sentencing and Sierra's plea agreement, Naomi had returned to Houston and thrown herself into building something that could not be twisted into a weapon against her. With support from King Enterprises, she founded a nonprofit organization that provided legal guidance and advocacy for transplant patients. The foundation's office was modest but busy, with volunteers answering phones and lawyers working pro bono on cases where patients had been pressured, misled, or exploited. Naomi sat in on intake interviews, listening to stories that sounded painfully familiar. A teenage boy whose uncle wanted him to donate part of his liver without explaining the risks. A woman whose husband insisted she sign consent forms in a language she did not read. Parents who felt they had no choice but to offer their child's organs under conditions they did not fully understand. Each story fed her determination. Dr. Leonard Price became one of the foundation's closest allies. He attended board meetings when he could and helped craft guidelines for ethical consent. On the day at the cemetery, he waited a few steps behind Naomi, hands in the pockets of his overcoat, giving her space. He had known her at her weakest and now saw her in a different light. Naomi straightened up and took a breath of cold air. Dr. Price walked forward and stood beside her. He said, "You ready to head back?" Naomi looked at the headstones one more time and nodded. Naomi said, "Yes. There is work to do tomorrow." They walked back toward the small parking lot together. The path was narrow, lined with bare trees that would be full of leaves again in a few months. Naomi did not feel as if her past were chasing her anymore. It walked behind her at a respectful distance. As they reached the edge of the cemetery, the late afternoon sun broke through a thin line of clouds, washing the path in warm light. Naomi paused for a moment and tilted her face up. She remembered the hospital ceiling, stained and yellowed. She remembered the private room with its clean windows. She remembered Damon's voice telling her that she was a solution to a problem and Reginald's voice telling her that what she did with her power would be her choice. Those voices no longer competed. They had settled into their places, like chapters already read. Naomi stepped forward, out of the shade and into the sunlight, walking beside Leonard. Her life was no longer something that happened to her in rooms where other people made decisions. It was a direction she chose with every step. If you enjoyed this story, please like, comment, and share this video with your friends. Subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss a powerful story drop.